All right, we are starting section 578, solving by finding the square root. We kind of got a sneak peek into this when we did our real world word problems yesterday, so hopefully you are confident in what we're about to go ahead and do. So, how do I know that I am going to be using square root? Well, if you have the setup here where it's ax squared minus c equals a number, that lets us know that we are going to be using square root. There is no b term. We just have an a term and our c term. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is subtract or add our c value. Then we divide a value by our a value, and then we take the square root of both sides. We're going to write our solutions as x equals plus or minus the square root, simplified if necessary. So the thing here is we're going to write this because it's not a real world problem. So we don't have to determine whether we're using a positive or negative value. So we're going to make sure that both values are being seen and used. Okay, so we're going to start here with this, our first example. So notice here, I only have my a term and a c term. And so I'm going to follow the steps. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. That leaves me with x squared equals 9. I'm going to then take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with x equals plus or minus 3. Okay, so because this plus or minus symbol usually isn't available, that means your solutions are x equals negative 3 and x equals positive 3. All right. All right, so let's try it again really quick here. So we have x squared plus 4 equals 20. So I'm going to subtract 4. Leaves me with x squared equals 16. Take the square root. And we have x equals plus or minus 4. So our solutions are x equals negative 4 and x equals positive 4. Okay. All right, so on this one, you have two ways of solving this. You can go ahead and factor out the GCF first, or you can go through and add, subtract, and divide. It really doesn't matter. So for the sake of formality, we're just going to go through the traditional. We're going to add 45 to both sides. And that leaves us with 5x squared equals 45. Then we're going to divide 5. Leaves us with x squared equals 9. Then we're going to take our square root. And we're left with x equals plus or minus 3. So x equals negative 3, x equals positive 3. Okay. Another one really quick we're going to do. So I have no c value, so I'm going straight into dividing because there's no c value. And I have x squared equals 25. Okay, so we're going to take the square root, and we get x equals plus or minus 5. So our solutions are x equals negative 5 and x equals positive 5. All right, so that is that. One more. Okay, so our last and final example is going to be a little different. It's going to take it up a little notch, okay? So here we're going to add 96, just like normal. And that gives us 3x squared equals 96. Then we're going to divide by 3, and that gives us x squared equals 32, right? Then we're going to take the square root. Uh-oh, we noticed something. I have x equals plus or minus the square root of 32. And 32 is not perfect, right? It's not a perfect square. So when that happens, all we can do is simplify. We can simplify the square root, okay? So to simplify the square root, we're going to kind of go back to our middle school days, talk about middle and intermediate. You remember the prime tree. So This is one way. One way is to think about the prime tree. And so remember the prime tree, you break it down to all your primes. Remember, a prime is a number that's only divisible by 1 in itself. Okay? So we've broken down our primes. And from your primes, you're going to pair them up. So for every pair of prime, they get to go on a date. Okay? So here's a pair of primes. They get to go on a date. Here's a pair of primes. They get to go on a date. And this little lonely guy gets to stay at home. So when it comes down to it, our simplified prime is 4 square root of 2. Okay? So that means our x equals negative 4 square root of 2 and x equals positive 4 square root of 2. The other way to think about it is simply thinking about it as what is the largest square root that 32 divides into. So you would have 16 times 2. And then take the square root of what you can and leave what you can't. So we have 4 square root of 2. Okay? If you're not good at that, then there's always skills that you've learned previously to help you navigate. All right? So that concludes 5.78. Okay, so 5.7b, notes on solving perfect square trinomials. Okay, so if we remember, we talked about perfect square trinomials. Okay, and when we talked about perfect square trinomials, what it comes down to is your factors are x plus or minus a value squared, right? And so the rule for perfect square trinomials, remember it was method number 6, is if the square root of your a term times the square root of your b term doubled makes your c term doubled makes the middle term, then it's a perfect square trinomial. Okay, and so when that happens, we want to actually factor it using that rule. So we would factor it, write it in factor form, equal to the number, and then we would take the square root of both sides, and then we would add or subtract our b value, and then divide by our a value, and reduce if possible, if necessary. Okay, so that's the goal for perfect square trinomials. So here, we have a 1 and 36. Well, 1 and 36, those are perfect squares, right? And if I ask myself, is 12 1 times 6 times 2? Yes, it is. That is a true statement. So that means that this is a perfect square trinomial. So I can write x squared plus 12x plus 36 as x plus 6 squared. Okay? If you forget that, just remember you're still asking yourself what multiplies to give you 36 but adds to give you 12. My magic numbers are 6 and 6. Okay? So it's equal to 25. So now to solve, I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and that leaves me with x plus 6 equals plus or minus 5. Then I'm going to subtract my b value, not my b value, I'm going to subtract my 6, this variable, my constant here. And I have x equals negative 6 plus or minus 5. Okay, this plus or minus lets me know I have two answers. I have one that's going to come from negative 6 plus 5, and I have one that's coming from negative 6 minus 5. So my two solutions are negative 1 and negative 11. Okay, let's try another one. So here I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 and equals 49/4. Okay, fractions are our friends, not our enemies. Okay, so again, double checking. Perfect square, perfect square. 9 is made of 3 times 3. 3 plus 3 makes 6. Awesome. So I know that this is going to factor down to become x plus 3 squared equals 49/4. Okay. I'm going to take the square root. If you remember from Algebra 1, when you take the square root of a fraction, you're taking the square root of the numerator and the denominator. So that leaves us with x plus 3 equals plus or minus 7 halves. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, so that leaves me with x equals negative 3 plus or minus 7 halves. So again, plus or minus tells me I'm going to have two solutions. I have negative 3 plus 7 halves, and I have negative 3 minus 7 halves. If I'm not comfortable working with this fraction, because this can be simplified down to an exact decimal, that gives me negative 3 plus 3 and a half. So if you owe me $3 and you have $3.50, once you pay me, you're going to have 50 cents left. So one solution is 0.5. Here we have negative 3 minus 3 and a half. You already owe me $3 and you're like, let me borrow another $3.50. So now how much do you owe me? You now owe me negative 6 and a half. Okay? See, fractions are our friends. All right, let's take it up a notch. So here we have 16x squared plus 8x plus 1. So 16x squared, 16 is a perfect square, 4 times 4. 1 is a perfect square. 4 times 1 times 2 equals 8. All checks out. So that means that this can be simplified down to the square root of 16x squared plus the square root of 1 squared. So we have square root of 16x squared is 4x plus the square root of 1 is 1 squared equals 16. Okay, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and that gives me 4x plus 1 equals plus or minus 4. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, so I have 4x equals negative 1 plus or minus 4. I'm going to divide 4 from both sides, and now I'm left with x equals negative 1 plus or minus 4 divided by 4. Again, that plus or minus 4 means that I have negative 1 plus 4 divided by 4, and I have negative 1 minus 4 divided by 4. So the first answer I get here, negative 1 plus 4 is going to be 3/4. Negative 1 minus 4 is going to give me negative 5/4. So my two answers are, if you are a decimal writer, okay, there you go, 75 hundredths, and here we have negative 1 and 25. Both acceptable answers. Just read the instructions when you're doing your assignment on which one is wanted. Okay? So your classwork and homework is on Canvas. The classwork and homework for 5.7 is meant for 2 days. So half of it you'll be able to do because of today's lesson, and then the other half you'll be able to do because of tomorrow's lesson. Okay? So you're just going to, as we learn how to do them, you'll complete them. And that is it. Thank you.